In my case, in light. Because I work in the dark, you know, literally. Lived in London from 1974 until 2013.
Pretty good stuff.
So, yes, long enough, yeah. Saw all the changes. I couldn't see myself living there when I was in my 80s, if I get that far. I couldn't see myself with the expansion of it, expansion of people, expansion of cars, you know, the whole thing.
Did London journey start with art school?
Yes. I originally went, well, if I go from school days, I went to Africa when I was 18, when I wanted to go to Farnham. I grew up in Guildford most of the time. I travelled around a lot as a child, but Guildford was sort of where I stabilised, so to speak. And leaving school, I wanted to go to art school. And then my parents decided to emigrate, and I went with them and they headed up from South Africa to Botswana, and I found that there was an art school in Johannesburg. So I went there for 1 year. So they went north and I went south.
Wow. So what kind of period is that when you were in Johannesburg? Art
69 to 70.
Quite an interesting period to be in that area of the world.
Scary bit. Moving from flower power straight into quite heavy apartheid. It was quite shocking, actually.
Yeah.
It's, first time I ever saw a dead body in a telephone box. And when I went to report it, their response was, "Is he black?" Ah, that was it.
Was it?
I thought, where am I? Having come from 1969.
Quite a transition.
Yeah, quite a transition. So I spent a year there, and then I decided that was it. I was going back to England, so I then applied for Farnham, for foundation. So I did 2 foundations. And then I went to Farnham School of Art, which had amalgamated after the sit-in in 68 with Guildford. So that actually was a year, and then I went from there to Corsham for 3 years for my BA, and then from there I went to the Slade for 2 years for postgrad. And I taught right across the board. I taught fashion, I taught on textiles, I taught 3D, I taught painting, obviously, drawing all the time. Yeah, all of them. And that's, I mean, I often wondered what I was. I mean, I always had this ongoing thing that I didn't know what I was, whether I was a painter or a sculptor or a designer or... and I'm a drawer. And that was common in everywhere I worked. If I went and worked in 3D, then it was drawing that could relate me to it, you know. If it was textiles, it was drawing that could relate me. If it was fashion, it was drawing that could relate me. You know, I can pattern cut because I can draw, so...
That was always a constant.
Yeah, that was the constant. And now I can call myself a drawer, I think. You know, that's what I am, you know. These are drawings that I make. I mean, people are sometimes a little gobsmacked by that, but they... You know, the fact that they actually come out of wireframe, the fact that I'm manipulating... you know, virtual lines in space to actually end up with these images. That's, you know, for me that's drawing. It's a constructive approach to drawing, and a virtual approach to drawing, and a head approach. Not really different from, you know, sitting down and drawing a model. The way that I work, because I work within the computer, I don't work within 3D space or 2D space. But actually, building work takes me a long time. And I do actually make a lot of work. But I don't always want to manufacture, so to speak. I don't want to, you know, to fabricate that work necessarily. I mean, it's always in there. I know it'll be very different, although I can anticipate what I want when it's an object. That's quite an odd thing, because you're always working with a screen that's backlit. probably a bit like film. You look at that and you look at a photographic print or something. There's a difference. So I'd be working on things and be working on series of things, and at a certain point, then I think, yes, I kind of like to see that in physicality. Then I will get closer to it. I'll work with more intent that it's actually going to be an object and therefore have physical dimension, and therefore what scale should that be, and what size should that be.
So if we go to the beginning of the piece, like is the idea already there?
No, not really.
Like, do you know what the final outcome?
No. I have no idea what a final outcome would be, because I'm always pursuing things. It's always, what if I do this, or what if I do that? To find out where the start is now that's a good question, because I suppose as you go on in practice and however long you've been working, the longer you've been working, then that question is almost irrelevant. It started somewhere way back, and then it ran, and you went this way, and then you came back, and then you went that way, and you went on for a while, and then you came back again, and then you took a left turn again, and you, instead of forking right the next time, you forked left again. But in the end, I suppose you go around in circles a bit. But there are themes there that I return to, which I suppose are the themes that are, the major things that I'm interested in when it comes to thinking and the visual world and the world around me. So, I mean, you look at things like these behind me, which are puddles, but they're also mosaics. They're mosaics that I've made in virtuality. The mosaics have a reflective quality when they're built in virtuality. And I reflect onto them skies, which are photographs that I have taken over years, many in London. So they're sort of composites of parts of my life, in a way. Grids have always been there. Tiling, I suppose, has always been there, whether that's in art terms or whether that's moving house and having to tile a bathroom. It comes into it, I'm a grid person, I suppose.
Has the process of actually doing it changed over the years, how it's done?
The fabrication of them, maybe, because I do tend to work all the time within the computer. Then there are these times when I think, right, okay, this is a series, I want to make these. So these then get made. And that brings in, all my sort of previous skills and concerns that I have to think about how it's going to be. Does it have to be bordered by it? Does it have to be contained? I like the idea of bringing it out as an object. To me, it seemed that these ones, the puddles, they're constructs in 3D space. They reflect something that comes from two-dimensional imagery that I've taken in the past, i.e. sky. They are illusions of puddles, because the tessera that I make them out of in 3D are actually bent in space, so that then they stand for the puddle, so to speak. And then it's interesting for me to bring that, back out flat, dead flat. And so the idea of putting it on canvas appealed to me, that it is a soft surface, it's not hard, shiny, it doesn't have any sort of similarity to that screen world. It's absorptive, So it seemed very logical to me to put it in, present it in this way, on a stretcher.
They look fantastic.
And of course, the tightness, If you get a really tight stretcher, then that tightness seems to exacerbate the notion of the tight little squares, So, yeah, I think they work. I think they work.
I can't remember the title of this one.
Seascape. Or Drowning. Whichever you like.
Is the process of this one creating it similar to how you do these two?
In essence, yes, because what I do, if I look back and say, what do you do all the time? Well, I make meshes. I make meshes, I make weaves, I make knits, I make skins of things, I make surfaces. And I suppose I did that when I worked in the physical world before working in 3D space in a computer. But within 3D space, I build these meshes. So these have three-dimensionality. The knit ones have a thread of wool that is a physical, virtual thing. You know, it actually bends in space and entwines and, you know, loops through, as in knitting. And then that's mapped. That's actually added to with visual information that I deem to be appropriate to whatever it is, you know, maybe I'm even thinking about at the time. And the first title for the Seascape one was Drowning. Why? Possibly because seas terrify me. It's probably my biggest phobia, the idea of being the sea, you know, looking down from a ship into black water. You know, it's like that seductive thing of standing on a railway edge and, you know, almost wanting to go, you know. It's not, this is not gloomy, it's just an instinct I think we may have. And so that seemed to be that I didn't really want to put it on knit, and I didn't really want to reflect it, didn't make sense to reflect it. So I decided to weave it. I've been weaving as well as knitting in 3D. And so that's a canvas. It's a virtual canvas with an open weave, with the sea mapped into it and onto it. So that seemed to be absolutely ideal, or a bit of a joke, that I put the canvas on a canvas. So it's a canvas on a canvas. Hence you see the edges of the weave, you know. And that's bent in space to sort of approach the notion of what might be happening in the photograph, you know, that the sea swells, that I can actually bend my surface, my substrate that actually takes that imagery. So they are rebuilt, so to speak. And then you're faced with you know, the viewer is faced with a three-dimensional illusion, which then has its own properties of sometimes you know, if you're up close, you have no idea what you're looking at. But if you back off, then it comes into focus, and you know, through the there's not a lot of mark on there at all, because it's 50% because it's on the weave, and a lot of that is just black. But actually, as you pan back, everything just comes into focus, and hopefully, you know, it's a bit terrifying. I always tended, in the early days, to work late at night. And so trekking across London in the middle of the night into the early hours of the morning wasn't always such a good thing to do.
So you still work late at night?
Since I've lived in the country, it's changed a bit. I tend to work, I mean, I still can find myself getting up at 2 because my mind's racing, and then I want to get on with it. But that's the immediacy of having somewhere that you can work where you are, you know. I get up and I go and work. Or I go to sleep, and then I decide that I'm going to have a day off, or I can work whenever I want. And I haven't got to travel, I haven't got to go there, I haven't got to take things there, I haven't got to carry things there. But equally, I don't have the reflection that you can have if you leave things. So it swings and roundabouts, I think.
Do you leave things for what? Purposely?
Not purposefully, that would be a bit of a fib if I said that. But they do get left, and it's probably because I get bored with them, or I can't go anywhere with them. I can't, you know, it's not holding me. I can't see where I can get excited by it. I can't say, what if I do this? I mean, when I did the knits upstairs that are the chainmail, I thought, well, yeah, okay, this is knitting. It's not chainmail, but it looks like chainmail, so I'll call it, you know, Agincourt, because it is this notion of Brexit, it is this notion of we shouldn't be dealing with this sort of conflict anymore. And then the what if came was, well, what if I actually made some real chainmail? what does it look like? What does real chainmail look like? And that, I thought, well, yeah, actually, I don't really know what real chainmail looks like. So I started, searching on the internet and searching through my books and finding, images as close as I could, which is the internet is great for that, actually getting close-ups of, okay, they've got 5 interlinked rings here. How do those interlink? My goodness, can I make that? I don't know. I'll have a go. And that's the what-if element, so that comes in. And if I don't have that, then they just, it's great working with a computer because you just store them, as long as you file them properly and you can find them again. But you store them, and then, I'll come back and, I never got anywhere with that. The water, I did some water pieces back in, 2003. And they were sort of reflections of puddles, but they were very still and very different. And so that, it's a return to water. The moons I haven't really worked with. Knitting, I've been trying to knit in the computer for 25 years. And I've never had a computer powerful enough to do more than 6 stitches and 6 rows. And that's just the intensity of constructive information that's in drawing a line like that, that is bent and curved and looped in space until now. So that gets returned to. So there are themes that, yes, I go back to all the time. And it's always 2D, 3D. I mean, I never fitted when I was at art school because I was... I couldn't categorize myself as a painter. I wasn't really interested in painting issues. And I wasn't really interested in sculptural issues, but I was interested in what was in between. That what's a 2D piece when it's hung so far off the wall? Or my sort of, I suppose, heroes at that time were people like Frank Stella, who were building paintings, but building paintings. These paintings were coming off, and they were part woven or constructed. And they just chunked off, and eventually they came into 3D space, And I suppose I was in that territory. I mean, that's what interested me.
Is that how it started?
Yes, yeah, I think so. I mean, as I suppose for me, I've since then sort of flattened out, whether it's a canvas weave or it's a tiling of the tessera of the mosaics, whether it's the knitting, it then became the front and the back. Okay, it's, this is actually a plane. Maybe it's bent in space, but it's a mesh. Maybe I've looped it right round. Maybe I've changed it from being essentially planar. But that actually has a front and a back. It has different ways in which I can view it. I'm the three-dimensional entity almost in it. I can move around it. It's not stuck on the wall, so I can't get behind it, And with the meshes, it's that business of lighting things in 3D. That, some of them, I mean, it came as a surprise to me, because one of the first knits that I'd made, I lit it from the front, and so the light hit the knitting, so to speak, and then you view it from the back, and because all the light doesn't come through, so it's like a percolator, it's getting these sort of, only tiny bits of light, and that interests me. I think, wow, yeah, of course it's different from the back, yeah. I didn't think that, So it's discovery, It's pretty banal discovery because it's pretty obvious.
Yeah.
But there's, every bit of discovery when you're working is obvious, I suppose, when you look at it in hindsight. I'm of the mind that there are probably only 40+ years left, which is pretty scary. I mean, one of the people I read, voraciously when I was younger and still read again is Lovelock, James Lovelock. And I think he was, way ahead of his time, and I don't think we paid too much attention where we should have done. I don't think we've done too much damage. And early days of working within the computer, I suppose one of my themes was, don't get carried away with this medium. It could be dangerous, You might forget the physical, you might forget the things that you might need to hold on to when somebody pulls the plug on the technology. And so there's always that balance. There's me wanting to keep the past and grow what is there with the future, not just to accept the future, but to actually use the experience of generations, let's face it. And that, yeah, in terms of the planet. Most of these are, I suppose, comments in some way. There's, you know, whether you can call a piece of knitting or a piece of canvas political, I don't like that word, but it's, yeah, there's an element of
I think it's just
my philosophy, anyway.
Being aware.
Yes, yeah. Well, I mean, you know, one the pieces behind you are called Pluto passing, and I sometimes think, why did I call it that? Did I call it Pluto passing because Pluto is literally passing by this grid, or is it passing? In other words, is it gone? You know? And Pluto punctured pink is the same, that we just punctured our grid through it, you know. Do we give a shit? No, we don't, you know, unfortunately. Well, it's not unfortunate, is it? It's just the end of us. Yeah. Something else will carry on. On watching people or knowing how people have reacted when they've stood in front of some pieces, I suppose that's what I can hope for, and what interests me is that people want to move up close to them. It does seem that people do get interested in how they're made. And if that's there, then you know, people will say, well, you know, well, why? And then you can enter a conversation, and that's, you know, as good a reason as any for making the work and showing it. I do it because I have to do it, and that's by the by. But when you actually put it in front of somebody else, then it's interesting to know what they will glean from it. I don't think I make pieces of work for others. I'm not sure many artists do that at all. But I am interested in what they have to say in relation to it, you know, how they feel about it. My nephew was here the other day and was talking about, he was asked if any of these, which would he like to own? And he was, you know, I suppose it was quite a surprise. He chose the knit with the flowers. And because he thought those were really intriguing in almost scientific terms, in the making of them. He'd never seen anything like them. You know, they're knitting, for goodness sake, but they're not your normal knitting. I think so. I don't think so. I think, you know, having made work for 40 plus years, you don't go on making it if you're worried by what people's reactions are. I mean, it's, you know, it's all very nice if people respond to it in a way where they perhaps get something from it. What that is, I'm not sure. I get things from it from one piece to another. I suppose it's a long-term getting, you know, that I get. I suppose I understand more what I'm doing. I'm exploring things that I realise that I might have actually gone that way early on, and that's intriguing to me that perhaps it's all the same, that I'm doing the same thing every day, and I've done it for 40 plus years, or maybe longer. And that's enough. That's, you know, I'm not going to stop that. That's, you know, as long as I'm physically able to do it, that's something that I seem to have to do. It doesn't really matter where you go. I mean, if you're out in, you know, the countryside here, you know, admiring a seascape, you know, in Hastings, or architecture in London, or, you know, the interrelation of a couple of dogs, or, you know, there's always things in there that trickle away at your consciousness and pop up a bit later, you know. Or maybe sometimes you let it happen in a, you know, my own dog died just before Christmas, and on the day that he died, the sky here went scarlet. You know, one could say, oh my God, that's, you know, spooky, you know, whatever. but it did. It actually went scarlet. It was extraordinary. And it was winter, so the trees against it were black and bony-fingered, you know. And so I took photographs. And a month later, I found myself making one of the weaves with this puddle of red sky. So it's called SCAPE, which was the name of my dog. And that, you know, that's how sometimes it happens. That's not, I don't think that's being sentimental. I don't think I'm sentimental at all, unfortunately, sometimes. But, you know, things like that trickle into it, and you're doing it, maybe you think at the time, for the sake of making the piece. But something will come from that. I then flipped from doing that just to doing something that was quite simplistic as a tiled square with one bend in it, and that was mapped with that same red sky. So then there became a sort of more emotive object and a very sort of like a control in an experiment object. So that I often work in pairs. So these two relate to each other. So it's, you know, here's the cool one and here's the more emotional one. That in itself will go somewhere else. That will, you know, that will push into another piece, possibly, you know, possibly next week, possibly in a year's time. I don't know. No, I think it's an interesting thing working in this way now because for what, 30 plus years with a computer, that you can store everything. You know, that's very different. I mean, I remember as a student, you know, I made very big things, sometimes, you know, 20, 30 feet. The studios were big that I worked in as a student. And members of staff would come in, and quite often the phrase that was bandied about to me was, you'll have some storage problems in the future. And actually, I don't. I probably make far more work than I ever did, but it's in the computer. I mean, I can sort of store my storage problems in there. And then every so often I can you know, come out with, you know, the show in Deal gives me an opportunity to put a body of work together. Things that I really do feel, you know, play off against each other and with each other and cross-relate. There's probably about 3 or 4 of my constant themes in that show. So, yeah.
Is that how you put the work together for it? You chose those?
Yes, yeah, I wanted to include some of the planet series. The planet series make me feel about the water, and the reflection series. And the knits are very, yeah, they're quite fundamental actually. I mean, they've been there for a long time. Not those ones, but me trying to knit. And why, you know? I mean, I have been known to say when I was teaching drawing that we all wear drawings because we all wear T-shirts. And what are they but knitted lines? So it's just, you know, it's just a lot of line here. And drawings everywhere. So
we can't escape it.
You can't escape it, no. Or weave. I mean, you're wearing a cotton shirt, and that's weave. You know, it's line. We make up from, you know, masses and masses of line. We make shape, surface, stuff. So yeah, it's an opportunity to put a range of things together. It's a very nice space where I'm showing, so it's an opportunity to play off in a different way. I see these knits that are behind me. They are 2 pairs. To be able to set them opposite each other will be interesting, so that rather than above each other, or side by side, that I can actually play off that partnership thing. So that's interesting to do. I think the thing is to try and get the reactions when you're not there. I mean, even with family or friends who come here, there is something that holds them back from having an out-and-out engagement about the work, you know, unless they're, you know, 5 pints of beer or something, and it might come out, you know, why are you doing this? But, you know, people are naturally, you know, guarded, I think, if they don't know what it is. I mean, it is as though that you are making them for some, you know, reason, when actually I'm not. I'm making them because I want to see what happens if I do that, and if I do that, oh, that happens. I like that, you know. That's it. That's enough. And then you make another one.